Hey guys, what's up? It's me. Today I would like to talk about load shedding from, I guess, an analytical point of view for us to understand fully what is happening here because I think many people are oblivious to the fact that load shedding is a deliberate strategy by Cyril Ramaphosa for us to get into using the renewals according to the New World Global Agenda. Nevertheless, because load shedding started in 2008 when Mbeki was a president, it's always in our discussions referred back to that time, people not necessarily looking or focusing on what could have been the root cause for that, how consistent was it, did it ever come to an end, or was there a deliberate sabotage from the Zuma presidency, to which Cyril was a deputy, to incapacitate the apparatuses of the state. This is consistent with both Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki's argument that the ANC was infiltrated, which a speech Thabo delivered in Bulugwan. So, without further ado, let's just firstly read this article. It's deliberate, says Thabo Mbeki, on crippling load shedding and Eskom as he bemoans systematic collapse of South Africa. Okay. Former President Thabo Mbeki says he believes there was a systematic attempt to collapse the key South African institutions like Eskom, leading to rampant and deliberate load shedding in the country. He said the systematic collapse of key institutions had set in since 2008, which was around the time he was booted out of government after a bruising defeat to Jacob Zuma at the 2007 Bulugwane Conference. Mbeki was forced to resign in September 2008, almost 10 months after losing to Zuma at the ANC elective conference in Bulugwane. Mbeki, who is the Chancellor of the University of South Africa, was speaking during a dialogue hosted by Thabo Mbeki's School of Public International Relations. Mbeki said the ruptures at Eskom, Transnet, the South African Police Service, the National Prosecuting Authority, NPA, and at the SA Revenue Services were a coordinated attack on the state. He said there were elements who were hell-bent on ensuring that South Africa did not succeed. Now, for me, this is pretty clear. I did a video recently where I was saying state capture 2.0. And I asked a question there. If Cyril Ramaphosa had a mandate to destroy our country, what would he do differently than what he has done up until now? I can't see what he would do differently. Cyril speaks the speech, but he talks the talk, but he doesn't walk the walk. If you listen to the speech, the 37-minute speech which he delivered when Zondo gave him the Zondo Commission report a year ago, that was firing on all cylinders on his side, but none of the cadres who plundered our country have been arrested and sent to jail. As a matter of fact, he literally pardoned Jacob Zuma, thereby clearly demonstrating that he is a partner in crime with Zuma. Nevertheless, I digress. Let's continue. Reflecting on load shedding, Mbeki claimed that the country's first bout of load shedding was experienced in 2008, and big industries such as mine had to be shut down for a week. He said it was strongly reported that the cause of load shedding was that Eskom leadership had approached government in 1998 asking for new power stations, and the government has supposedly ignored them, leading to the first bout of load shedding in 2008. That story was cooked. It was false, said Mbeki, who said the actual reason for the load shedding was that some power stations had run out of coal and had not replenished the coal supplies accordingly. They did not replenish the coal. There was not enough coal at the power stations. There was coal in the country, said Mbeki, alluding to sabotage from within Eskom. Describing former Eskom Chief Executive Brian Molefe as an old friend, Mbeki said, Molefe dealt with the load shedding by managing and repairing infrastructure, and there was no load shedding between 2014 and 2017. I'll come back to this. By the time load shedding comes back in 2017-18, you have new people who don't behave in the way Brian Molefe behaves. Why? I think it's deliberate, said Mbeki. And by the way, here, I do agree with Mbeki here, because I've always asked the question that I just asked a few minutes ago. If Ramaphosa was given a mandate by whoever is his puppeteers or puppet masters to destroy our country, what would he do differently? No one is yet able to answer this question for me from all the educated people that have asked this question, except to say he appears to have good intentions. Good intentions are not enough when you don't act on them. When you have the power that he has of sending criminals in jail, of protecting whistleblowers, of removing ministers, the list is endless, but I just want to focus on this one right now, the load shedding issue. In January 2021, Molefe blamed President Cyril Ramaphosa for load shedding. Now, Mbeki said, the expensive Kusile power station, which has now cost the taxpayers over 160 billion, is over 8 years behind schedule, was a typical example of how the nation was being hindered. Now, this has happened from the time of Jacob Zuma right now to where we are right now. Mbeki said Indian contractors were appointed to build Unit 1 at the power station, which they delivered in much shorter period than expected and started producing electricity in 2018. But things quickly went wrong when it was expected that the Indian engineers would have the contract extended. Quote, then there's a strange thing that happens. They expected their contract to be extended to build more units. Eskom says get a black equity partner, a black empowerment equity partner, BEE. Now, I think if you listen to my channel, you know what my views are on BEE. The Indians came with 50 engineers and technicians. They say if you have black engineers to join ours, Eskom says we don't have that. He said the contract was eventually terminated after the Indian firm failed to find a BEE partner. To this day, Kusile is still not finished. The Indians went home. I am saying it is deliberate. It is people who have wanted to produce this electricity crisis in the same way they wanted to create a revenue crisis at SARS. Look at Transnet. The police, the prosecution, all of these things are going wrong systematically. Is it an accident? Mbeki said. Mbeki said the systematic collapse of institutions from 2008 was not only fueled by greed and corruption, but was far more a sinister attack on the state. And here I agree. And many people would, if, for example, this was not coming from a former state president with all his, credibility, many people would say this is a conspiracy theory. But from my own sources, I have a strong reason to believe that this is the case. There's a whole process which takes place in this country which still we don't understand, of a systematic process to ensure that the Democratic Republic does not succeed. That's one of the things necessary for us to understand. None of the negative things that happened, none of them are accidental. There is greed, there is corruption, but at the base of it is to make sure that we fail. It is a matter of strategic importance to understand what went wrong because there were deliberate processes put in by some people to make sure we fail. Meanwhile, during the state visit to South Africa, China committed to helping. Okay, that's a by the way. Let's get to Mbeki's assertions regarding SARS. Mbeki said the country had in the past 15 years seen a sharp decline in the collapse of the police, prosecution, SARS, as well as Transnet. Referring to the matter of former SA Commissioner Tom Moyane, he said, U.S. firm Baines started preparing for the job, for the job a year before he was appointed for the job. I want to read that again. Referring to the matter of former SARS Commissioner Tom Moyane, he said, U.S. firm Baines started preparing him for the job a year before he was appointed for the job. How did they even know that he would be appointed? There is a clear indication that something sinister is happening here. Mbeki said there was a need to do a lot of thinking and research into why South Africa went down after 2008. He said SARS had been overperforming since 1994, and then it suddenly started underperforming. There was a deliberate decision to destroy SARS, he said. Once again, if you have followed the relevant commissions in our country, this one was led by Judge Nugent, the SARS one. He uncovered exactly the same thing. And if you follow the Zondo Commission, Justice Zondo uncovered exactly the same thing and gave a report to Ramaphosa, and he has not acted on that report. Why? Because he is in charge of this systematic, what we call destruction of our country. Even with his predecessor. So he is in charge. It's like, how does he, for an example, send these people to jail if he is their commander-in-chief? There's no way he can do it, because the day he does, a lot of truth will be unveiled in the public domain. There was a deliberate and conscious objective to destroy the democratic revolution, he said. Mbeki said it was a matter he believed the ANC should address. He also said the ANC, since 1997 Mafikeng Conference, had been attracting people who were using it as a step ladder to gain access to tenders. Look, this may be true, what he's saying. This is where myself and Mr. Mbeki would part ways. Because for me, I don't know if these people are, how can I say, these ANC members had gone to the ANC because of that, or that they are simply generally corrupt. I don't believe the ANC is able to fix this country. That's where we part ways. I agree with everything he has said so far, but this is where we'll part ways. Nevertheless, I'm reading what he is saying. He said all conferences since have warned of such people, but nothing has been done to rid the organizations of those people. He said the culture of factionalism was also rife, which was at odds with ANC values. He said the 2018 Nasrec conference called for renewal, and this was repeated at 2022 Nasrec second conference or two, but still was nothing. There was nothing, but still nothing was changing. Okay, that's just his own, obviously, inputs on the matter. Let's get to a different analyst analyzing exactly the same thing, because I'm trying to buttress the points that I agree with in what Mbeki is saying here. Now listen to this.
Lungile Mashele, let's start with a little bit of context and maybe take a look at the performance from 2017 to 2022 under that leadership. What have you observed?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I think what I'm going to look at is the period from 2015 to 2017, where you basically got the leadership of Koko as well as Molefe, and basically then juxtapose it against 2022 and where we are currently. It's important to note that their leadership sort of overlapped over a 2-year period, and the accomplishments that they achieved must be judged in that 2-year period. And I'm just going to run through a few parameters that we look at in the technical side in terms of successes. If we look at diesel spend, FY 2017, only 340 million was spent. 2023 financial year that ended now in March, Eskom is expected to have spent 21 billion in diesel alone. If you look at energy utilization factor, which is what we look at how hard a plant is actually run, international benchmarks say it must be 76%. FY 2017, you're looking at 83% marginal increase. If you look at 2022, it was sitting at 93%. This is in contrast with everything that we've been told about the Molefe and Machela era, that they were running their plants hard. In essence, it was being run harder during Andre Raid's time. If we look at energy availability factor, 2017, it was sitting at 75%, highest we've possibly seen in the last decade. 2022, it was at 58% on average. Currently, we're sitting at just below or 50% depending on the month that we're in. Planned capability loss factor, this is looking at your planned maintenance. Again, 2016, 14%, 2017, 13%. This was very high. 2022, it was sitting at 10%. If we look at CapEx spend on new capacity alone, 2017 was sitting at about 13 billion rand is how much was spent on new capacity. If you look at FY 2022, only 3 billion was spent on new capacity. The last time Eskom was profitable, 2016, made a profit of 900 million. Eskom is expected to post a loss of over 20 billion for the 23 financial year. And just lastly, on load shedding, a massive technical parameter. 2016, 2017, 0 days of load shedding in South Africa. 2022, 200 days of load shedding, and it looks like 2023 will certainly surpass that record as well.
So I just want you to observe for now the analysis that is being given to you and understand it. That one, during the Matsela Koko, Brian Molefe era, this lady is simply confirming the data that we were reading from what Mbeki has said, that we did not have load shedding during that period that Molefe and Matsela Koko were in charge. There was no load shedding in the country. But when Ramaphosa came in and removed those two for reasons known to them, right? And remember, he is yet to charge them because they have not yet appeared in court for whatever he claims that they have done, as Matsela has been saying publicly that he would be found not guilty. For me, that's beside the point whether he's guilty or not, because you could charge a person. Remember, there is a presumption of innocence, so he still needs to appear in court, right? And up until then, it is my view that he should have been allowed to carry out his responsibilities until he's proven guilty. When he's proven guilty, he can go to jail. This is an issue of national importance. If the man has an ability to cause a country not to load shed, load shedding loses us business. It creates unemployment. Okay? And look at the amount that has been spent in these two different periods, during the era of Matsela Koko and Brian Molefe, and during the era of the gentleman that was the CEO last year who resigned, the Rata. They are spending billions. This is nothing short of looting. As a matter of fact, the Rata attested to that when he left Eskom, that there was looting and there's an attitude that it's our turn to eat. So Eskom is literally self-sabotaging. And why is it self-sabotaging? Because it is being allowed by the commander-in-chief of the country. He is the one that has the ability through the apparatus at his disposal, such as the NPA, to prosecute those people and to send them to jail. Where were these looters when Matsela Koko and Brian Molefe were at Eskom? Why couldn't they loot at that time? Why couldn't they cripple Eskom? Because someone was in charge. That is why we didn't load shed for a period of 2 to 3 solid years when Brian Molefe took over Eskom. Now, I stopped the video so that I could make you to understand that the same people, because the thesis that there were stations that Mbeki was told to build and they didn't build, Mbeki denies that. He says this never happened. And even if it did happen, the question that we should all critically reasoning people should ask themselves is, how is it that Brian Molefe was able to work with what we have at our disposal currently and get us to not load shedding for that long a period of time? That was not by by chance. Obviously, if it was by chance, it couldn't have gone on for that long. And then yet when he left, we started load shedding for 200 days in a 365 days. That is a serious crisis, and it's an engineered crisis. But let us continue.
In a nutshell, were they better for or at Eskom?
Technically speaking, they were the best thing that happened at Eskom during that time. You got a period where Jacob Marocha from about 2019 was in power. Load shedding ended then at some point, followed by Brian Damas up until 2014. Technically, performance was astounding, amazing. Then we had issues in between. Molefe comes in, Matsela come in again after their tenure or during their tenure, no load shedding for a 2-year period until they leave, and we start with load shedding in 2018. It is undeniable their impact on the utility and on the country from a technical point of view.
And what does that speak to? Their skills, their competencies, their qualifications?
So, it's important to see this in context and understand that someone like Matsela Koko is what I would call ESCOM sort of baby, born and bred, started his career there, looking at his experience in technology, in generation, and eventually, heading it up. There were certain protocols that were in place from the Maroka area all the way to the Damas area, that when they came on board, they were simply able to reactivate and continue with the good performance. But let me take you back to 2015 and what actually happened. When when Molefe joined, there was load shedding that we're experiencing in the country, 2015. And he came in and said, give me 3 months, I'm going to run what we call a maintenance festival. And during this time, I'm going to load shed the country at stage 2 every single day. I'm going to remove plant and units, and I'm going to maintain them. And they did this for a period of 3 months. It was painful, but it was successful. After that period, all they did was run reliability maintenance, and this is why we did not have load shedding. Their program was so successful that ESCOM ended up having excess capacity of about 4,000 megawatts that they were then able to sell to the region, and this is why even their financial performance improved during that time also. Because of the excess capacity that they had, they were then able to remove certain units that were not as efficient as others that were expensive to run at, like your Hendrina and your Grootplay, because they said it's uneconomical to actually run them. So that's how good their technical performance was during this time as well.
You stressed how good they've been in terms of technical performance. Why is that in comparison to the entire picture?
So it's very important, because if you look at a CEO of ESCOM, or you look at ESCOM's compact, it speaks to improving capacity, or rather increasing generation capacity, which they were able to do. They brought on units in like a unit each at Medupi and Kusile. It speaks to having a high energy availability factor, which they were also able to achieve. It also speaks to having a sufficient reserve margin in excess of 10%. Their reserve margin even allowed them to have excess capacity that they could sell through the region. When one is looking at the CEO of ESCOM, one is not interested in many things. You're looking for energy security. You are looking for availability of energy. You're also looking for, a cost competitive, or like, let me say, I would say a lower tariff is what you're basically looking at. And if any CEO can give you this, ultimately that's the best CEO of a utility, all things, withstanding.
Sure. Lungile Mashele is an energy expert. Thank you very much for helping us make sense of that.
So you get to learn then that the combination of Koko and Brian Molefe was the best the country has had in the last decade or so, but Ramaphosa deliberately took them out, and these people appeared in the Zondo Commission and they testified in the Zondo Commission about what has happened. But it is pretty clear that the lawyers that were there were seeking to discredit them. They did fail, make no mistake about it. You can go through it yourself and listen to the witnessing in the Zondo Commission. Both Koko and Molefe, they literally volunteered to be there in the first place, even though the commission was hostile towards them. That is why I don't believe Zondo is independent and objective at all. Even though the commission itself was hostile towards them and they were trying to discredit them, but they couldn't do that successfully at all. Pay attention, leave the noise, just focus on the signal. Pay attention to their interviews, follow the interviews right throughout. You'll come to the same conclusion if you have an objective mind. Now, as a parting shot, let's just hear Thabo Mbeki reiterating the points that I have read here. Let's hear from him and see that this analysis by Lungile and Mashele, an energy expert, indeed confirms what Thabo is saying.
There is somebody who was an old friend of mine. I don't know if he still is. I think he still is. Brian Molefe. Brian gets appointed to head ESCOM in 2014, April or thereabouts. And by August 2018, they had finished with the load shedding. Again, all of us who are old enough will remember that. Already then, that 2014, no more load shedding. 2015, no more load shedding. 2016, no load shedding. It comes back towards end of 2017. And all what they did, Brian and his colleagues, was to maintain the equipment properly. To maintain the equipment properly so that you don't have to have these shutdowns. Now, if you ask anybody, what did Brian and the others do in 2014, such that for so many years there was no load shedding? They will find all manner of reasons. Instead of looking at this one, to maintain, to repair, to do whatever. And indeed, for so many years, there was no load shedding. He left. After a little while, it came back. So I say, it was very correct of Brian Molefe to say, I've been brought from there to here to deal with this matter of load shedding. Let's look at it seriously and act on it, which they did with positive results. So by the time this load shedding comes back in 2017, 2018, you must be able to guess why. It's because you got new people who don't behave in the way that Brian Molefe behaved. Why? I think it's deliberate. Seven years after Kusile started building the Kusile power station, 7 years after they started, there was not one, whatever you call it, of electricity that was coming from Kusile. After 7 years, nothing. What ESCOM did was to contract an Indian company to come and build Kusile. The company came and built Kusile Unit Number 1 in a much shorter period than was expected. And Kusile Power Unit Number 1, there it is, generating electricity. After 7 years, this Indian company was able to solve whatever the problem was. So it is not as though during the 7 years there were no ideas as to what is it to do in order to make sure that Unit 1 produces electricity. But the people who were there decided that they would not use that knowledge until the Indians were brought in. We used that knowledge, and in no time, Unit 1 was working. And then there's a strange thing that happens. So the Indians are expecting that their contract will be extended so that they do Unit 2 and Unit 3 and so on. No. ESCOM says to them, we will extend the contract on condition you get a PEE partner. So what the Indians had done, they had brought something like 50 engineers and technicians from India to do this power station. So of course they say to Eskom, we don't understand what you mean by this black economic empowerment. But for instance, if you have some black engineers to join ours, so maybe that. No, we don't have people like that. And they were training 150. As they were working on that Kusile thing and Mitupi, they were training 150 people. But because they couldn't agree on this BEE thing, they terminated the contract of the Indians. The Indians went home. Kusile is still not finished to this day. I'm saying it's deliberate. It's people who have wanted to produce this electricity crisis in the same way that they wanted to produce a revenue crisis by the destruction of SARS. You look at all of the state institutions. Look at Transnet. Look at what's happened to the police service. Look at the prosecution. All of these things going wrong systematically. Is it an accident? It's not.
So, my fellow countrymen and women, I agree with almost everything that President Mbeki has said here, save to remind him that BEE was his brainchild. Nevertheless, he would probably argue and say that it doesn't make sense in the context within which they wanted to implement it. But the point is that BEE does not advance efficiency, effectiveness, or competency at all. It simply advances cadre deployment, and it leads to lack of service delivery. The same is true with affirmative action. If you want to appoint incompetent people, you would go ahead and do that. But one thing central to his debate is pretty clear and has been clear to me for years, that there is a systematic sabotage of South Africa. They started this during Zuma's administration. I am not necessarily saying Zuma was the commander-in-chief, as I'm saying Ramaphosa is. I think Zuma was a victim of individuals that deliberately plotted corrupt activities behind his back, which is the very reason why they placed him there to begin with. Remember how Zuma became a president. He had about 778 charges against him of all manner of charges of corruption. So he should never have become our president. To this day, he has not been tried for those. He's still going to some court, but none of these are finishing. And you can see what is finishing faster, rather, is his life, in the sense that he's old, so he can go home any day now. He's 80 years old, 81 years old. But nevertheless, that's not the point. I do not wish him death. I wish him long life, to live as much as is reasonably possible. My point is this. I don't believe that he was in charge of what was happening in South Africa. And again, this was proven in the Zondo Commission, that a lot of individuals underneath him used his incompetence against him. Whilst they were literally praising him publicly, but privately, they were outsmarting him in many avenues than one. A simple example is how Gauteng was run, right, by the so-called Alex Mafia. Another example, well, there's plenty of examples to make, but I guess it suffices just not even focus on the Alex Mafia, to mention it as a by the way. The other thing we could mention is how Inkandla, for that matter, was built, and the escalation of costs in the building materials. That, for me, was demonstrably clear that a lot of people took advantage of the individual. Of course, he benefited, as Thuli Madonsela concluded, but Thuli also indicated that there was extraordinary escalation of costs, meaning things were overpriced. He did not have the wherewithal to know what was going on. That is why we should never ever put a president in place who is not educated. Okay, it was an error to do that. As a result, he was misused and abused by so many people that worked under him. Okay, now concerning Ramaphosa, I believe Ramaphosa is a strategist. He is the one that has the real state capture. If you think that Zuma had captured the state, then explain why he ended up in jail. Explain why the public protector was able to do what she did, that is to Lima Donzel. Explain why Mogoeng was able to make so many judgments against Zuma. I'm quite convinced that the person who really has now captured the state is the one against whom none of these apparatuses of the state that were designed to literally have oversight over corrupt activities, and now none of them are able to act against, and that is Cyril Ramaphosa. I don't want to talk about Palapala. There's none of them that can act against Ramaphosa on any issue. Why? Because, as I said, Ramaphosa is not playing checkers. He's playing chess. He's a chess player. He's a strategist. Every single action and move that he makes is well thought of. Whether he does that alone or with his puppet masters, I don't know. But it is pretty clear. From the COVID issue that was well orchestrated, to sanction, to sideline the Constitution of the Republic the way he did, to practice lawlessness, to have 60 million people sent in prison in their own houses like that. Now, please don't come and say the whole world did it. The whole world was not under apartheid. They do not have the militant spirit that South Africans have. They do not come from being oppressed in the last 30 years. The point I'm trying to make here is, how did he make such militant individuals so docile as to believe that he was serving their best interest? So Mbeki is correct, and I agree, as I said, with most of the things that he said, save the point that indeed I depart with him when he says that because he is creating an impression that the ANC could still resolve the problem. That's why him and myself disagree. I have to buy into his rhetoric that it's not the ANC that has led the country to where it is. It is people who have hijacked the ANC from within. The point of the matter is this: the ANC, since he was the president, has never demonstrated that it's serving the people of the Republic of South Africa. The last time our economy had good economic growth was 6% under Thabo Mbeki. The last time there was progress in our government, indeed, it was under him. That one is truthful. However, loadshedding did start during his era as president. Now we learn that it is false that they were approached in 1998 by Eskom. So there is a cabal at Eskom, and it clearly has a hegemony, right? And I'm saying to you, Ramaphosa somehow, this is why Ramaphosa kicked out Molefe and Koko out of Eskom, because when you listen to their testimony, they literally accuse Ramaphosa of being an active role player in the people that are sabotaging Eskom through coal. Make no mistake about it. Go back and listen to those. But nevertheless, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but you literally can make reference to what Thabo is saying today. You can go back to what Molefe said and what Koko said in the Zondo Commission, even though Zondo tried to suppress some of the information, precisely because Zondo was already betting for an opportunity of becoming a Chief Justice and retire as a Chief Justice. That is my view. That's my opinion, and I have a right in this constitution to express it. Okay? And it comes to load shedding. There's an 8.5 billion that Ramaphosa received from America a few months ago. Listen to the former statistician general Ndade Pari explaining how that is not good for South Africa. Unfortunately, I'm not going to make a 2-hour video. I'm already at 40 minutes. But what I'm trying to say to you, if you do your own research, you'll come to the same conclusion that Ramaphosa is sabotaging even our electricity, because he is literally receiving money from America for what? Many South Africans do not know this, but I think the Raider spoke about it, that there are few power plant stations. Even the current Minister of Electricity is being frustrated by Ramaphosa in that there are few stations that have been repurposed. Instead of being used to generate electricity for us, they are being repurposed. Why? Because they want to come up with this clean energy nonsense, right? And I'm calling it nonsense because when you look at China, China is building, every week is said, power stations from coal. This comes out of the lips of Donald Trump. Not only Donald Trump, many other American conservatives will tell you China is building coal power plants. And Germany, by the way, has forsaken this Green Deal as well. They've gone back to their nuclear, they've gone back to their coal. As a matter of fact, some of the European countries are getting coal, according to Nkosazana Zuma, directly from South Africa. Now, I'm trying to take snippets of my own research and share them with you. But if I were to give you details of this research, this is going to be a 3-hour video or so. There is a lot of information out there to prove that we are being sabotaged from within. So this is why I have been saying we need to remove the ANC. This then gives the opportunity to those who are true members of the ANC and who have ethics to cleanse themselves whilst they are not in government. And we have a government of national unity that will get rid of the rot that is in our government and bring the country together to where we ought to be, so that the gap between the rich and the poor is not as great as it is. Because when we have a country that is as electricity is working, it will deliver the services, in that businesses will be opened, they will be able to be productive, uninterrupted. SARS will be able to collect. The police will be able to protect whistleblowers. They'll be able to police. They'll be able to arrest criminals. The judiciary will be able to send people to jail when they commit offenses, and so on and so forth. But for as long as that machinery owes allegiance to one individual who is an incumbent, for an example, what Ramaphosa is doing in South Africa reminds me of what Joe Biden is doing in America. And Ramaphosa speaks very highly of Joe Biden, a Joe Biden who's completely inept. But I must stop this video over here. It would do you a lot of good to research so that you inform your vote.